keep in mind that most of the money is stolen. There's a reason that Zelensky has over $1 billion in his bank accounts. Remember, two members of his government and inner circle, Mindich, and I've forgotten the other one's name, they have now fled to Israel because you cannot be, as a Jew, extradited from Israel, brought anywhere and placed on trial. I'm sure Zelensky may well decide to do the same thing, given the fact that he's also Jewish. These people are running Ukraine, and they're destroying it. They're running it into the ground. So you can give them all the money you want, and at least 50% of it will just vanish. It'll vanish into various black markets and into people's bank accounts. The Ukrainian army is no less corrupt than the rest of the society. We could spend hours talking about the corruption in Ukraine. So anything you send there is going to be wasted and stolen. The second part of this, though, is very important. Most of those claims that have been made have been debunked. They're just not accurate. They're wrong. I mean, when you pick up drones that appear to have been originally Ukrainian or Russian, and then repurpose them with microchips that are inserted from Poland, then fly them into Poland and try to create the illusion that Poland is under attack, it's pretty obvious what's happening. The Russians don't need to blow anything up in Eastern Europe right now. It doesn't make any damn difference what they do in Eastern Europe. I mean, if you're going to go after something, why not go after Rheinmetall, which is one of the largest defense contractors in the world? But Rheinmetall is not going to produce anything in any great numbers soon enough to make any difference to what happens in Ukraine. And thus far, everything the Germans have sent over there, the Russians have managed to destroy. Now, some of that is because the Ukrainians don't know what they're doing. But then again, some of it is also because those things have been employed inaccurately and ineffectively. We have just failed in the West to really study what has happened in Ukraine militarily. We think we have. We point to this out of the next year. So the Army just announced that they're going to pay for some outrageous number of unmanned aerial systems. In fact, you and I talked about that.
Yeah.
And your point was valid. Your point was, by the time this stuff reaches any future battlefield, it'll probably be obsolete because that's how long it takes to produce these things. And the pace with which improvements are imparted to all of these unmanned systems is absolutely incredible. So we're out of it, and none of this matters. That just take that thing and throw that in the trash. It's irrelevant. It's another last gasp to produce some evidence that they can hold up to somebody and say, see, the Russians are coming, the Russians.
You know what this really shows? The money going to Ukraine isn't saving the country. It's disappearing into private accounts. And when officials start fleeing abroad, that tells you everything. They know the collapse is coming, and while the West keeps sending weapons and cash, none of it changes the outcome. Half of it is stolen, the rest is wasted. The battlefield moves faster than our technology, faster than our plans, faster than our politics. So when you hear these staged drone incidents and fake alarms, it's not about defense, it's desperation. A last attempt to drag more nations in, because deep down, everyone knows the truth. This war won't be won with money or headlines. Reality has already shifted.
Early March, late February 1943. The Stalingrad fell on the 2nd of February. 4 weeks later, Hitler flies to his Eastern Front headquarters, not far from a place called Poltava, which has interesting historic meaning because that's where the Swedes were destroyed in 1709 by the Russians. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is there was a meeting there, and he brought all the 4-star equivalents in the German army on the Eastern Front into this room, along with large numbers of 3 stars. And Albert Speer had sat down with Milch, who was the chief of the Air Force, and Guderian, who at the time was the Inspector General of Armored Forces, and they put together a presentation. The presentation is very straightforward. The presentation says, we have limited resources and limited time. Think about that. Limited resources, limited time. We need to stop producing all of these things. And he went down the line. Stop producing these V-2 rockets. It's never going to come to fruition soon enough to make any difference to the outcome of the war. Sound familiar? Stop producing these giant assault guns, 152 millimeter assault guns that the artillery loves. Forget it. It's a waste of money. We need to do basically 3 to 4 things. Number one, put all of our resources, all of our money into jet fighters. Hello? Does that make sense? Sure. Build jet fighters. Nobody can match us. They already had heat-seeking missiles for the damn things. You name it.
This moment in the story is powerful because it mirrors what we're seeing today. Germany in 1943 had limited time and limited resources, just like the West now, and instead of facing reality, they kept pouring money into projects that couldn't change the outcome of the war. Sound familiar? The message back then was simple: stop wasting resources on things that won't matter, focus on what actually changes the battlefield. But today, Washington and Brussels are doing the opposite. They keep funding future systems and fantasy weapons that won't arrive in time to make any real difference in Ukraine. History isn't repeating itself, it's warning us.
We need to stop building all these different tank models. Okay, we pick one tank model, and that's what we build. Then we build the assault gun. This was the 75 millimeter long-barreled assault gun. You've seen it. There's no turret on it. It's sort of a fixed gun. Well, they managed to destroy 40,000 tanks with that gun on the Eastern Front. He said, that's what we do. And then we'll have transport for the infantry. They've got to be mobile. We'll use half tracks and various things, but that's it. That's all we build. That's where we put our force, all of our resources. And Hitler said, well, generals, what do you think? And they all objected, because they all had a dog in somebody else's fight. Oh, you can't take that away from us. Oh, that we don't want that, and we don't want this, and so forth. So then Hitler, being the politician he was, turns to Guderian and Milch is sitting there and says, see, how can I do what you want me to do when my generals won't agree with you? So the rest is history. Now, you take somebody like Michael Howard, or any number of distinguished historians have pointed to that meeting and said, if you'd done things differently then, right then, the war could have gone on for 3 or 4 more years. That's how important the decision-making was. There has never been a coherent military strategy for Ukraine. Never. Remember, you started this and you started to talk about, well, look what's happened over time. All these years have passed. The Europeans say this, we say this, we'll send patriots. There's no strategy. In the absence of a strategy, it's the old story. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you to your destination. Well, that's what's happened in Ukraine. The destination has been reached. It's called total destruction. It's over. And the longer this lasts, the only outcome will be more dead Ukrainians, more destruction of whatever the infrastructure is that's left, whether it's the energy grid, electrical grid, doesn't matter. Everything will be destroyed. And there will be nothing left. Now, perhaps that's Zelensky's secret goal. I don't know. But my point is, it's over. It's been over for some time. Draw the right conclusions and end this thing. But for the reasons we're discussing, the globalists cannot give it up. And remember, their populations aren't dying. So the hope is that the globalists can precipitate or provoke or evoke a response from the Russians that will kill some of their citizens. And their hope is then everyone will get mad and do something. I mean, it reminds me of Churchill during the Second World War in this was late 1940. The German Air Force, whether it was deliberate or not, I don't remember, but they actually struck the shipyards in Glasgow, Scotland. And Churchill celebrated. This is wonderful. We'll finally get the Scots on board for the war, because people in Scotland didn't want to go to war. Certainly not against Germany. They did that once before, and it killed hundreds of thousands of their people. So they weren't interested in doing it again. That's where the globalists are right now. They would like the Russians to do something that can then become a catalyst in their minds for real resistance and real wartime thinking in their own countries against Russia. It's not going to happen.
This is the same mistake we're making today. No unified plan, no clear strategy, just different leaders protecting their own interests. And when everyone pulls in a different direction, the result is always disaster. Ukraine has reached that point. No amount of weapons or promises can change it. The war isn't being prolonged to win. It's being prolonged to avoid admitting it's already lost. And the tragic part, the people pushing this aren't the ones paying the price. They're waiting for Russia to slip and give them an excuse to rally their public. But that moment isn't coming. Meanwhile, Ukraine keeps getting destroyed for nothing.
Billionaires who currently are shaping policy here in the United States have made their money. They are going to fight tooth and nail to keep that reserve dollar status, but it's failing. it's failing very, very badly because no one wants it. The dollar is something that people don't want to have to do business in any longer. And so incrementally, each passing week, each passing month, as we move from year to year, fewer and fewer people are doing business in dollars. The Saudis, who we think of as strategic partners, are now doing business with China exclusively in yuan. And the yuan is now establishing its connectivity to gold, and gold is going to become the standard for BRICS. We're in a lot of trouble. So we're on a very short tether, if you will. We can't go on much longer than we have thus far. And I think that's also behind all the ridiculous statements and rhetoric by Macron. And by the way, in France, I think his approval rating is probably almost as bad as Donald Trump's. I think Donald Trump is hovering around 30%, and I suspect that's where Macron is. I'm sure that's where Starmer is, and Merz is not far behind. All of these people are on the road to extinction as political leaders. There's no question.
This is the part nobody in Washington wants to hear. The dollar isn't collapsing overnight. It's bleeding out slowly, deal by deal, month by month. When even the Saudis start trading in yuan, that's a signal the old system is breaking. And the elites know it. That's why the rhetoric is getting louder, more desperate. They're trying to protect a financial order that made them billionaires. But the world is moving on, toward gold, toward BRICS, toward alternatives that don't put America in control. And here's the twist. The politicians defending this system are losing support everywhere. Macron, Starmer, Scholz, all sinking, because people can feel it. The old order is fading, and the leaders tied to it are going down with it.
Ukraine is lost, and that's going to become patently obvious. The Russians are going to be victorious. They're going to dictate the terms under which the map is redrawn and new actors emerge. But there's something even more important than what happens in Ukraine, and I predict that Germany will walk out of NATO and walk out of the EU, because it's the only way for Germany to liberate itself from the oppressive influence and power of the EU and NATO. Remember, many of your guests have said this, and people always chuckle over it. I always thought it was deeply offensive and thought it was dead wrong. But this was the attitude in Great Britain and France and the United States, and that is NATO exists to keep the Russians out and the Germans down. Well, the Germans are finally emerging from this state of Stockholm syndrome that they've been living in for decades, where the German walks in the room and his head is bowed and says, "Oh, I'm sorry, we're bad, and we know we're bad, and how much money do you want?" That's over. The Germans have had it with that. The new generation that's coming up is sick of it. The alternative for Germany is sick of it. And this Atlantic alliance has not produced security for Germany. It's dragged Germany into a confrontation with Russia that most Germans want nothing to do with. So Germany is going to march out of the EU. It's going to march out of NATO. When that happens, that's the end of NATO and the EU, because the only way they can exist is with Germany as the linchpin, as the keystone in the edifice. Once the Germans say enough and walk, it's over. And that's where we're headed. So this entire war in Ukraine that was launched to destroy Russia and was always linked to the idea, and this goes back to the White House in 2020 when I was in there, and I wrote a paper on it, and it was given to the president, and he just, I don't think he could even imagine it, but it was an argument against disrupting relations with Germany because of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And I tried to outline the hundreds of years of very profitable and productive relations between Russia and the German-speaking peoples based on an exchange of commodities, commercial relationships. And the elites actually got along very well. If you go back over the last 300 or 400 years of history involving Germany and Russia, the two world wars are anomalies. They should never have happened. And they did happen. It's tragic that they did. But I think both Germans and Russians have concluded this must not happen again. And Germany will leave the Atlantic Alliance, and it will leave the EU for these very reasons. And all the neocons that have done everything they possibly could to promote death and destruction and war in Eastern Europe and across the continent, These are the same people who have pushed these migrations, heavily funded by people like Soros and others, who couldn't wait to shove millions and millions of people into Europe who are not Europeans, will never be Europeans, cannot become Europeans, and don't want to be Europeans. They are all going to stand around and then begin to say, see, the Germans are evil. They're back at it again. They're evil because they're charting their own course. They've decided on their own future. It's a lot of nonsense. There's no Nazi revival there, nor will there ever be one, in my judgment. But what you see out in eastern Ukraine, for some reason, these same neocons are happy to see these Ukrainian soldiers sport SS emblems in their war with Russia, which makes no sense at all.
This is the turning point. Once Ukraine's defeat becomes undeniable, Germany won't stay in NATO or the EU. They're tired of carrying guilt, tired of paying the bill, and tired of being dragged into a fight they never wanted. And when Germany walks out, both NATO and the EU collapse with it because Germany is the backbone. The West tried to break Russia and ended up breaking Europe instead. And the same people who caused this mess will pretend Germany is the villain the moment it chooses its own future. Meanwhile, they ignore the open SS symbols in Ukraine. The hypocrisy says everything.